On episode 233 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to data expert Dr. Selena Fisk, and she's going to teach you how to be a data-informed decision maker and not a data-driven one. It's all about data today, folks. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast on leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, welcome one, welcome all. It is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy. So good to have you here today, tuning into yet another great episode from the world's best leadership podcast. That's quite humble of me, isn't it? Well, you got to think it to believe it, and I believe it, so here we go. But no, this is just one of many great podcasts out there that you can listen to, so I'm actually quite humbled that you're here listening to me today. So thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to grow with me, because that's what it's all about here at the podcast. And today, it's all about show me the data. Give me the numbers. Show me those numbers. Have we not heard those before? Show me the numbers. Where's the data on that? And so much more. And if you're like me, you're probably going, yep, I've heard that before. I've been told that / asked that. And it's driven me nuts. Why? Because, well, you just can't quantify everything out there. Yet, we live in a very data-driven world. Like, we are accessing thousands, if not millions, of data points a day now. Everything is giving you data. Your phone's giving you data. Your computer's giving you data. Heck, your watch is giving you data, your car, truck, whatever you drive, maybe even your bicycle. And it gets confusing, right? Especially when you're not a numbers person. You know, us as leaders, it's not always about the numbers. It's about the people. It's about ourselves and our organization and culture and all these things. Not data. But here we are. We're going to talk about data today. And to do so, I brought on an expert guest, Dr. Selena Fisk, who is a data expert and consultant who is passionate about helping you sort through the numbers and talk about the real story behind those numbers, and most importantly, lead positive change. She's all about being data informed and not data driven. She's mentored execs, senior, middle leaders, and all kinds of other people. And not to mention, she is doing this, as her own business. So she takes what she preaches and applies it to her day-to-day business, and then in turn helps you, the leader. And if you're like, Scott, I'm not a numbers person, I got you. I hear you. I am a numbers person, so I can't say I completely line up with you. But what I will tell you is this, and that is Selena goes in this episode and makes it crystal clear for you as a non-numbers person. And that's the most important thing. That's what we want, and that's what we need to be able to get out of these podcast episodes. Take tangible things and then run with them. So, that, ladies and gentlemen, is today's episode. And that's enough with me. So why don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation about how to lead with numbers featuring Dr. Selena Fisk. Selena, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So we're talking about data, we're talking about numbers, we're talking a bit about your latest book, I'm Not a Numbers Person, which is interesting. So this is going to be a bit tough for me to even connect with that title, because I am a numbers person. I am a data-driven type person. I like working in that area just because of my background and what I do for a living and my day job. So that really jives with me. But why are people out there scared of numbers in the first place? Let's start with that. Why is like, oh, I'm not a numbers person. Like, why is that even a thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, the title of the book is a little tongue in cheek because clearly I am a numbers person. But, people say it to me all the time. I work with people that kind of say, yeah, Selena, I get it. And I know that I should be paying attention to the numbers and the metrics that I've got, but I'm just not a numbers person. There's a number of different reasons why people get to that point in their life, but I reckon it really does stem back to what happened in, our early kind of formative years in primary school, where almost people are labeled as being math science people or humanities people. And I know for myself, I did a lot of math science subjects, and I very much had an identity going through school as that being my strength and me not being very good at words, which is a little ironic now that I've written a book. But I think it really does stem from that. And the fact that, when we go into English and maths and we have learning time that's dedicated to one subject or the other, we almost see them as silos and we don't actually see that they're connected. But in a lot of my work, it is about kind of bringing the narrative and bringing the stories in with the numbers. And it's just not a skill that we've necessarily grown up with. So yeah, it's interesting. Like, I used to be a secondary school teacher, and by the time kids get to year 7 and year 8 and were walking into my classroom, they had their own identity as, I'm either good at maths or I'm not. So yeah, and I reckon parent perceptions have got a fair bit to contribute to that as well. But anyway.
No, it's valid points, and I enjoy your little history. I was much the same. I was my favorite subject in school right through was math. Straight up math.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't get enough of it. And it's interesting to see my 7-year-old who I had to print off the multiplication tables and put them on the wall so he can actually learn them. And he just finished grade 1 and he's learning multiplication on his own, which is insane.
Wow.
It blows my
That's
yeah. Right. It just blows my mind. But it's very similar to him. He's struggling in writing. And guess what, like, you want to see my handwriting? My God, like, you talk about stereotypical doctor writing. I have it. I wish I had the pay of a doctor, but I have the handwriting to be a doctor. Right. So it's just that stereotype of where we kind of fall into one of two camps. Right.
Yeah.
Which is, again, ironic with you. I ended up having my bachelor's in history and then my master's, one of which was an MBA, and my second was in defense studies. So very hard writing, stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting how we kind of cross-pollinate at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've taught a lot of secondary maths, but I'm actually secondary school teacher trained in maths and physical education. So I used to be a head of physical education previously. So again, it's almost that kind of cross-pollination of working in teams and working with people and human anatomy and all of that kind of component of physical activity. And then maths is just so different. So yeah. And I think that's, in some ways, that's certainly helped me on this journey to be able to draw from both of those different I guess experiences in the work that I've done in that space. So yeah, it's just hard when people can be sometimes potentially pretty fixed or have a pretty fixed mindset around, well, I just can't do numbers, and then they just accept that for a really long time. And I just don't actually think that that's true anymore. I reckon we can all get better at it, and we desperately need to, and we need more people in our organizations that are getting better at it. So yeah, it's how do we shift that? I guess it's a long, slow game, isn't it?
Well, that's literally my question is like, how do we get people, out of that fixed mindset and more into a growth mindset of, okay, yes, I'm not good at that today, but I can be good at it, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, whatever.
Yeah, in terms of teaching, like I go back to my teaching experience and I think about what would I have done with a 15-year-old boy sitting in maths saying to me, "Oh, well, I'm just not good at it." And in some ways, I think we need to treat adults in our organizations in a similar way. It's multiple exposures and multiple opportunities to practice and ask questions and give them time and support to build their skills. I have a data diagnostic that I run, and I've had about 2,500 people do the diagnostic over time. And the two questions that consistently score the lowest are around the time that they're given to build their skills with using data and the support that they get from their organization. So out of a score of out of like 100% as being the absolute maximum, those two questions score at about 40 and 46% consistently. So that's certainly something we need to do. But the other part of that, I guess, which comes back to what do I learn from teaching, was also celebrating and recognizing and sharing with others when people in our organizations make progress in this space. So if they do something really good, how are we recognizing that and sharing it? And I guess what I've learned in the work that I've done over the last few years is that one size doesn't fit all in this space. What will work for some people and some leaders and some teams can be really useful and interesting for other people in the organization to see and learn about. And that can almost spark a bit of curiosity in them and start getting them thinking about, well, how could I potentially use this, or how could this be beneficial for me? So yeah, sharing and recognizing the progress that people are making, I reckon, is a really kind of good way of building that culture and also normalizing the fact that this is a skill that takes a long time to build. It's not just a one-off professional learning day, or you can't just go on a course and be magically better at using numbers. It is a long game, and we're in it for the long haul.
Oh, you're hitting my heart with all that. Like, it's like warmth coming in, pouring into me. Listen to our listeners, like hit rewind and go back a couple minutes and re-listen to all that. Because you hit on so many crucial leadership topics that revolve not around just data, but leading as a whole. One, having the psychological safety to make mistakes, having the time to go back and learn from said mistakes, having the culture that revolves around that type of a workplace, and understanding that it's a journey. It's not just, oh, a one and done, but rather a journey from that continues, because there's skill fade involved with this stuff, right? Data and analytics. The longer you step away from it, the quicker that people forget, or the skills just dull over time, right? So there's so many things in there that can be applied to not just data right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like leading any change in any organization, right? You need to
Mm.
think about how you're building capacity in other people. You need to be vulnerable and open to sharing with people that you won't necessarily have all the answers, and that you're on this learning journey with them. The other thing is, like in any or leading any change, is having a group of early adopters, or having those people who are really on board and believe in the change you're trying to make, and really harnessing the power of them. Because if we're able to lead change with that small group, and you might have seen the YouTube of the dancing guy, and it's a guy at a music festival that comes out and the music's playing and nobody's dancing, and one person comes out and he's dancing alone, and then
Yeah.
slowly another, yeah, you've seen it, a couple of people come join, and it's an analogy for leading change. And you know it's that applies to the use of data and building a data informed culture in our organizations as well, because we can't just come down heavy handed and expect that everybody's going to, I guess, come to the table at the same time. It is about thinking, well, who can we almost tap on the shoulder? Who can we get into a data team? Who can we really start to celebrate and recognize? Because every organization has people in in their organizations that have actually got a fair bit of wisdom and creativity and some ideas around this space, or might actually be using data really well. And it's about how do we actually identify those people and get them sharing their work with others, because yeah, we've got to do the work from the inside out, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of great points there. That video, I believe it was, from my recollection, it was talking about how leaders aren't actually leaders. The leaders are the first followers, and everyone follows follows the first follower of the leader. So it was an
Yeah,
interesting video. I think it was during a lecture during my second master's program that I
yeah,
saw it
right.
for the first time. It was a very interesting video for sure. But I like what you talked about there in, finding early adopters in, and I believe that is a crucial step in, leading any change, really. Like right now, I'm running my team through a massive change, we're getting ready to launch on a massive change. So this is my night job. It's actually night here. You're in Australia where it's morning. It's 7:47 at night here. This is my side hustle. By day, I'm a senior Canadian Army officer, and I lead a fairly robust team of 25 folk. And right now, what I'm getting ready to do is getting ready to shake up our organizational structure, roles, responsibility, the whole 9 yards. Of about 10 of the 25 are getting shaken up, and so on and so forth. And the other 15 there's going to be a change that's going to affect them as well. And he's like, this has been in my head for a while. And it's just like, this needs to happen for X, Y, Z reasons. I won't go in and bore you with those. But the thing is, I've been kind of piecemealing it. I'm like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? I say, hey, this is the problem I see. Come back with some solutions you got. And I've had solutions in my head, but I wanted to see if they would come back with the same ones. And then, okay, very similar. Oh, I took some ideas, I incorporated into my ideas. I've threw it up on the whiteboard, brought people in ones and twos at a time, like, hey, what's your thoughts here? And getting them, and they're like, hey, yeah, look, think about this, or what about that? And I'm like, oh yeah. And then I go back, redraw it, and now I'm actually at the final point of, okay, here's the plan. Start dice, here's the plan, everyone, here's the plan, this is how I see it, start hammering at it, type thing. And I've been trying to get those early adopters. So my question to you is, for the leaders out there who are listening, and they go, yes, we need to make data more important. We are lagging behind here. I hear Scott, I hear Selena. Yes, that is important. But how do I go finding the right person, the right fit to be that early adopter? Because we're all busy, we're all stressed, we all have so much to do. What's the right person? I can't waste this opportunity.
Yeah, I really liked in what you just shared, that idea of collaboration. So it's not a decision that you're making with your restructuring for your team. You're asking them what they think, and you're taking on board some of that feedback. I have no doubt that you're listening to what they're saying. But also, I think what you possibly alluded to, and what I've seen a lot, is that when you go and ask people, they often confirm or reiterate what you thought was going on anyway. And so being able to then lead a change where you're able to say, okay, well, we've had these conversations, these are the things I've been hearing, and therefore these are the changes that we're making or are coming out of this process. That's a lot more powerful. It's significantly more impactful than you walking in one day and going, right, I've got this plan, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're moving forward. I've totally forgotten what your question was. Sorry, you're going to have to edit that bit out.
No, it's all good. We're gonna keep it real. Guess what? We all make mistakes. We all forget. We get into this train. We keep it real. No, the question was, how do we identify the right people to be
Yeah,
those
sorry.
early adopters, right? Get them
Yeah, so
on
in
board.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, it's similar to what you've done. Even ask people who have an interest in this area to come and have a conversation with you. Think about putting a team together, and this is I guess different advice applies to different organizations, because some organizations have got analysts, they've got people that work in the data space, and then you've got people in your organizations who are not the data people, and they perceive that the analysts are the ones that do all that work, and they go and ask for a report, or they go and ask questions of the analysts, and the analysts report back to them. So if you're in an organization where that's the case, and the space I guess I work in is trying to bridge the gap between those two groups. So we need to be getting those groups of people in the same room having conversations about data rather than just relying on or expecting that it's a transmission of information from the analysts to other employees. So we're trying to almost raise the low watermark of all of our staff, all of our employees. We still need the analysts. We still need them doing some of that work, but we want employees asking really good questions of the data and being able to engage in rigorous, useful conversations and questioning around the information that they've been given. So, analysts or no analysts, one of the way that I see some organizations, I guess, branch into this for the first time is to set up a data team. And so if you've got analysts, they might choose to be on the data team. But you are generally, I think the most successful data teams that I've seen have been ones where people are invited to the table. They're not told that they are now in this new team. And, this is what we're working on and this is what the goals are. The thing that I've noticed when organizations do that and they open the invitation to people to be as on that team is that they always get people that they wouldn't have expected. People who are interested, people who maybe know that they want to or are conscious of the fact that they'd like to build their skill in that area, who put their hand up and agree to be on it, and then really kind of shape the direction and the focus of that team moving forward. As you were saying before, the power of those early adopters, that group essentially then becomes your early adopters. The benefit of them is that they're going back to their teams or the people that they work with. And as you mentioned, they're leading the change then for you because they're facilitating the conversations with other people who wouldn't have put their hand up to be in that team. But they're shifting the culture progressively by being able to do that. The other way, I guess, that I've seen in larger organizations is where the leadership or the executive team do some of the work first, followed closely by the middle managers. And then the idea is that we bring their skill up and we improve their capacity in using the data and engaging in data storytelling. And then we equip them with the skills to go back and build capacity in others. Because if your organization, even if it's got, say, 100 people in it, trying to roll out this change for 100 employees is quite a difficult ask, whereas that kind of top-down, as much as I don't like that language, almost the top-down approach can have more of an impact because you're able to work closer with a smaller group of people that will hopefully have a greater impact, and then they're the ones charged with leading their people as well.
No, that's great. I especially like the fact that there's no one cookie cutter solution, right? Every situation is different, every organization is different. You really got to think about it through. But you gave some nice, what we call in the Army lingo, left and right arcs, i.e., kind of guidelines that people can follow. Kind of like the interesting thing you talked about was like when there's self, what do I refer to? It's not agile theory, not developing teams, but assigning teams, basically teams that develop assign their own tasks type things where you're like, okay, we're going to do this. Whoever wants to be a part can come. And you said it's interesting because people generally get surprised by the people who actually show up. My experience tells me they're the ones that are generally most frustrated with the current situation. They're like, oh, this is my opportunity to make this change. And for example, for myself was like my job, I have nothing to do with day-to-day information management. But guess what? A major project I'm at the head of right now is revamping our information management systems. Why? Because I am so frustrated at some of the archaic ways we're doing business. And I come and I have talks with people like yourself, and I interact with all kinds of different organizations, and like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, then I go to work and I'm like, I feel like I'm with a stone tablet and a chisel, like Flintstone, like dink, 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 dink. All right. So I just got, and the boss said, all right, he's like, we got to fix this. I'm like, yeah, we do need to fix it. I put me in, coach, put me in. Cause why? Cause I'm frustrated. I want to make some positive change, and we're getting there now. So find those people and they'll be the ones most motivated to move you in the right direction is my moral of the story here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've certainly seen that on teams. For me, it's also that skill versus will
Yeah.
matrix. I'm sure you've seen it, the continuum
Yeah.
of, skill versus will. And obviously the people who most often are going to choose to be on a team like that are the people who've got some skill in this space and are really willing to make the change. But the next group of people that tend to join are the people who are really willing and want to make a change. As you say, they may not necessarily have a lot of skill in what that looks like or how it's going to, I guess, unfold over the next 6 to 12 or 24 months. But because they're willing to be there and they're willing to give up their time, they're absolutely great people. That's gold to have those people on side, because we can teach them the skills. We can teach them how to engage with the data. We can tell them, or we can work through with them what we prioritize and what we focus on and how we engage in the data storytelling. We can do that. But when we've got a captive audience, that is just so much easier, and we can have a really significant impact more quickly than if we've got people that we're telling that they have to be there on the team, but actually they've got very little willingness and they're very disinterested.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing worse than someone who is forced to be there when they have absolutely one, no skill, two, no desire, no interest in it. Now, you've mentioned something a couple times, which is piquing my interest. You've mentioned data storytelling.
Yeah,
that's a new one. Honestly, it's not, because I read your book, but it's the first time I hear of it in a podcast interview. There we go. And now I'm not lying. So my question to you, for the listener out there, is, what is data storytelling and why is it important? And then I guess the follow-on part is, how can we use that in our day-to-day lives as leaders for max effect?
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to forget part of that question because I know there was 3 parts to it. But anyway, let's keep going.
Sorry, that was a super long one. Let's start with, what is it?
Well, so when I first stumbled across the term data storytelling a few years ago, it was a real light bulb moment for me, because I constantly was focusing on, we've got all this data, we've got all this information. We're not short of data. Like, that's not the problem here. The problem is that we're actually not using it all that well. I often get people coming to me saying, Selena, we've got all this data and we're literally not using it. And so data storytelling for me was that light bulb switch that was really about, well, that for me is the action. That's the being able to, yes, we need to understand the data. We need to be able to read our visualizations. But at the end of the day, we can be exceptional at both of those things. But if we're not engaging in data storytelling, which is where we're actually thinking and talking about action and shifts in our organization and in our team, all of that data collection is a complete waste of time and space. So, as I say, real light bulb moment for me. In terms of what it does, and there's a couple of different ways of conceptualizing data storytelling. So there's a couple of different people who work in this space and talk about it often. Brent Dykes is one of them. He wrote a book called Effective Data Storytelling, which is really great. He talks about data storytelling, as being a skill similar to, reading a book to a young kid. It's how do we actually communicate the information with others? How are we bringing in together? And he has this really nice Venn diagram of the data itself, any visuals that we need, and then the narrative, and how are we overlapping and how are we drawing on all 3 things, and how are we constructing the narrative with the data and the visuals to convey that message to others. And in some ways, I believe that, so he's very similar to a couple of others. For me, I reckon that's a conceptualization of data storytelling as like the name of it. What is data storytelling? It's bringing those 3 things together to be able to communicate insights to others. For my work, I conceptualize data storytelling more as being like a verb, like a doing word. It's 2 kind of key parts for me. So the first part is, and these 2 questions relate to anybody. It doesn't matter what role they're in, what organization they're in, what sector they're in. The first one is, what's the data actually telling me? So what are the insights? What am I seeing? What are the trends? All of those questions kind of fall under that same, in that same basket. The second part is then, now that I know those insights, what am I doing about it? So for an executive, they'll be looking at maybe organization-wide data. And that for them, the 2 questions are, what's it telling me? And then what's my response? For the second, for say middle managers, same thing. If they're looking at data for their team, it's always what's the data telling me? What are those insights? What do I do about it? And for an employee, the questions are exactly the same. So, in terms of how we do this and how we improve our data informed culture, and this kind of goes back to a question that you had earlier. For me, it's actually about building the capacity of people in those two areas. How are we teaching them how to identify insights? And there's a lot in that, because they need to understand the data, they need to be able to read the visualizations, all that sort of stuff. They need to be able to know what actually matters and what they should be paying attention to. That's a really important skill in itself. But then how are we getting them to actually connect that to action? And how are we creating the culture and the structures and the processes within the organization or within the team that allow them to then talk really openly and collaboratively about what they're then going to do as a result of the data?
For someone who said they forgot the question, you just like nailed every single part of it. I was like, wow.
I kind of remembered midway through, so I just
Yeah,
kept going.
and you just kept rolling. It was awesome.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, she's answered the question as I'm like updating the show notes.
Sorry about
But
that. Just keeping you on your toes.
no, it's awesome. This is exactly what I want. I really liked how you talked about, it's you can use data storytelling to essentially, identify the situation, reasons for problems, and so on and so forth. But then you make informed decisions on the way forward. And I'll give you I guess a personal example. So at work, we've had a chaotic year. So I operate in a unit that is high. We refer to as high readiness. So we can go out the door at a moment's notice and not know when we're returning. And the past year has been absolutely chaotic, if you haven't noticed the world. So we've been extremely busy, and we actually, as one of the senior leaders, my supervisor and the rest of my peers and stuff, we ran the numbers, and obviously I won't get into the numbers, but we're like, holy cow, we've been on the go. And the number of days we've had people out, and by out we mean internationally. So we've been able now to, essentially, as you say, data storytell, like explain, like, we've done all these operations, and here is the number of days of deployed person, referred to as deployed personnel days, X, which equates to per person who's available, Y, and stuff like this, and just explain through the story, like, this is, and then it's like, and now here are the intangibles that we're hearing, i.e., people are having burnout, people are worried about their family situation, people are extreme, still concerned about COVID issues and stuff like this. And then we just use the data to back up all the intangible, statements, which we know is true. You feel it. You feel it. It's true. Like I look at my team, like, yeah, I looked at one of my guys and said, you're done. You're going nowhere for the next while. And he's like, why? I'm like, no, like, and people are like, oh, we got to send someone. I'm like, it's not him. He is not going, not happening. And like, why? I'm like, because he's been gone. Like, I don't know since when. And they're like, oh, wow. Like, okay. And like, he's been gone for X number of days already this year. And there's only been Y number of days available to go. And they're like, oh, okay. So, I use that. Now, so here's my question to that is, I'm talking about the intangibles. How do we find that balance between data and then the intangibles of, oh, I feel burnout, or we're stressed, we're running ourselves too far? Because I run a free Facebook group, leadership skills for managers who want to be leaders, not bosses. That's the name of it for the listener out there. If you're not part of it, feel free to join us. And I asked, what's wrong these days? Where's your pain points? Where can I help you? And I hear the same things every single month. I literally put this question in the group once a month, because what I like to do is do essentially a Q&A podcast episode off of that question. And every single month is burnout, stress, individual conflicts between members, so on and so forth. So, these are all intangible things. So how can we use data, but at the same time recognize that these intangibles exist and get them to complement each other, go against each other?
Yeah. So I often make the distinction between being data informed and not data driven. And I fiercely advocate for a world in which we're informed by the data that we've got, not driven by it. Because if you're driven by the data, that's when things can fall apart. You're making poor decisions that are going to impact people. Like in your instance, people who've been away too much. You almost need to override the data that you've got, the quantitative kind of hard facts, with your understanding of those people, the context, all of those other challenges as well. So for me, when we're informed by the data and not driven by it, where we use the quantitative information, we use the numbers, but where we understand the context for the organization, for the team members, the economic, even the economic climate. It might be seasonal for some organizations. There might be changes in seasons. And so we're informed by that information rather than it driving our decision making. And in that example that you shared before, sometimes the data just confirms, a lot of the time the data confirms what we already know, and that's great. It's when it doesn't. It's when it surprises us that we absolutely need to be acting. But sometimes as well, the data, the insights that we see, we actually need to make a conscious decision to not act on. And that's a bit controversial, but it's important that we've at least gone through the decision making process and the inquiry process of looking at the insights and then thinking about action. And the example I'll use is, for example, if you owned a restaurant or like a retail store during any of the COVID lockdowns, if you were to look at your data for that quarter, that half a year, annual income, whatever it might be, the insights will be really clear. But you're not necessarily going to need to take action on that, because by being data informed, we know that yes, the numbers have dropped. Yes, the numbers wouldn't have been as good as they were the year before or whatever it might be. But actually, we understand the context of what was happening, so we don't necessarily actually need to act on that. We just need to get our doors open and get people coming back in, and we need to get people spending money again, and a lot of those things are out of our control. However, we still need to go through the data storytelling process to be able to get to that point. And obviously there are things that we could then do. We could think about marketing and how are we encouraging people to come and shop in our store or come back to our restaurants. But, just because our revenue dropped during COVID doesn't mean that we need to act on that specifically, if that makes sense.
No, it makes absolute sense, and I thoroughly enjoyed that example because we often see. Um, I like to investing, right? I do all my own investing, and I go through, and the person who I follow. Shout out Mike Aru, by the way, from Dividend Stocks Rocks. So I'll let Mike know. I give him a shout out. Mike says, it basically says, like, look into the story of the company before you go and buy a stock. If you look at the last quarter and the quarter is like, boom, down. Well, what was the reason behind that? And you're like, oh, they made a huge acquisition, which, turns, if you look at the night, you think you extrapolate that. Well, and you look into the other company and that has huge revenue, huge profit margins, all this stuff, well, you can go, okay, the expectation now is that profit is not only going to go bounce back up, but even go beyond because of this acquisition. By now, right? Like, so
Yeah, it's a
that's
good
why I like it.
example. Yeah, we've got something similar in Australia. We've got quantitative ratings of stocks, so you can go and get a quantitative, and it's just basically all of their data's been dumped into an algorithm, and it comes out with is the stock currently overvalued, undervalued, or about right? And so you can use that. But as you say, you wouldn't be making all of your financial decisions just based on that information. You'd want to go and do some research and find out why it's currently undervalued, or what's the market volatility. Like, there's all those other things that one number doesn't actually include. So yeah, it's all about being data informed, right?
Right. So on that note, a little role play here. I'm a leader. I'm a middle manager. Maybe I'm a senior leader of a mid-size or a large company. You can run with it as you please. And we have data, but yeah, it's data. Like, we look at the numbers, and then and then we kind of like, okay, whatever, and we generally go with what our gut feel says or what the boss says to do and stuff like this. But I believe in it. I believe in what you're saying. I believe in data storytelling, and more importantly, I believe in making data informed decisions, not data driven decisions. So how can I get me and my team there? What's the steps to get to being that data informed decision making enterprise that we need to be?
Yeah. So, I mean, a first step, if you wanted to do the data team kind of example, that would be a really good step. But Tom Davenport talks a lot about business analytics and the fact that change in this space can take 24 to 36 months for an organization. So I'd encourage you, if you're in this space right now, while a data team might be an initial thing that you could do and then work out kind of together what your focus is and the areas of the organization that you're going to work on and what you're going to do collectively, I'd also encourage you to think about how can you map out the next 24 to 36 months of what this looks like. Because what I have seen organizations do is start this change process with really great intentions and some really good ideas. And then, we all get busy. There are always distractions. There are competing priorities. And then it falls away. And, you alluded to this before. If we just have a data conversation with people today and then we get completely snowed under and we in 4 months time come back and go, oh gee, we wanted to make some change here and we haven't kept talking to people about it, we almost have to start again. So over that 24 to 36 month period, there needs to be deliberate upskilling and deliberate time and resources allocated to staff development in this space over time. So I mentioned before, I have that data diagnostic. It's on my website. Anybody can take it. It's free. So even if you wanted to get people in your team to do the data diagnostic, it gives them a PDF and even open the conversation about where are you at? Like, where are your skills? What are the areas? So for me, I've mentioned these a few times, but it's data literacy is the first part, data visualization is the second, and data storytelling is the third part. That report gives people a score and compares their results to other people who've done the diagnostic before. So that could give you, as an organization, some guidance on where the gaps are in your team. But yeah, as I mentioned kind of right at the beginning, the two things that come up in that diagnostic that are the biggest issues are the time and support that people have to build these skills. So regularly building time and space and capacity building into a 2 to 3 year program and mapping that out from the beginning, I reckon is the best way to start.
Love the end of that part. Drop it in the calendar, make it protected space, and let the team do what you ask them to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because it's just time.
Yeah. 100%. If you don't plan it, if you don't prepare for it, you don't protect it, it's going to get filled with something else.
Yeah.
I see it day in, day out.
Yep. And people forget, right? Like, and going back to an analogy of like a young kid, if we wanted to show them how to tie their shoelace, we wouldn't just show them once and then assume that they know how to do it and they're going to be able to do it for the rest of their life. We need to keep practicing and we need to keep coming back to it. And and I think it's exactly the same with adults in a lot of ways.
100%. So, a personal example for me is that we have a morning a week where it's protected time for me as a leader of my team. That is just my time with my team to be able to get together with them, go over things, whatever, right? We have that morning assigned. There is no unit level meetings. There is not, no plans, nothing that is supposed to be protected time. And now suddenly one day a meeting invite popped up and I was like, okay, blindly hit accept, because I knew I was going to go to it. And then I check my calendar. I'm like, wait, now that's us. So I went back hey, that's our time. That's our protected time. And for the leaders out there listening, that's what you need to do with these times, right? If something is actually big enough priority, you need to protect it. And that sometimes means you have to push back. You go, no, we agreed this is going to be protected time for this team to do this. They need that time.
And I'm super aware that time is money. 100%. It's a cost to the organization. But the benefits outweigh the cost. I mean,
It's an
if you're
investment.
able to optimize, the money that you're making, or you're able to improve the service that you're providing for your clients as a result of people learning more about the data and then acting on it. Like if you're able to mitigate or minimize risk, like all of that is far more important and worth a whole lot more than, allocating a couple of hours every fortnight or whatever it might be to spending time on this work.
And for North American listeners out there, fortnight means every 2 weeks, just FYI.
Oh.
Most of my audience is Canada, US. Just gotta do that translation. It's all good. Selena, this has been an awesome conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. As we wrap up here, I do got a couple last questions for you. The first being a question I asked all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. And as according to you, Selena Fisk, what makes a great leader?
Somebody who's data informed, obviously, but I'm not going to stop there. I just can't overstate the importance of vulnerability and willingness to recognize and acknowledge that none of us have all the answers. None of us are perfect, and we're actually far stronger and far better as a part of a team. So the more we can harness other people's brain power and show people that we really appreciate that and value that, I think that makes a really great leader.
Couldn't agree with you more. I often say the role of the leader is not to have all the answers, but rather ask the right questions this day and age, because we can't know it all. And then the final question of the show: how can people find you, follow you? Shameless plug. Have at it. It's all about you right now.
Yes. My website is selenafisk.com. So SELENAFISK.com. My books at the moment, right now, I don't think you can buy them in Canada. It'll be end of the year that you can get them. But yeah, you can grab them online on my resource page. But yeah, I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all of the socials. You get varying, types of content on each one. Some have more dogs than others.
You sound thoroughly happy to go, yes, my info. But for the listener out there, all jokes aside, you can check out the links. They're in the show notes as always. Go to leaddon'tboss.com/233 and the links are there in the show notes as always. Selena, thank you again for coming out, talking to us today. It's been fantastic.
That's okay. I think for me, as this has been an awesome conversation, but just listening to the way that you pronounce out every time has just made my heart sing. So thank you so much, Scott. It's been awesome.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss. And thanks for coming out. Take care now.